3rd year and counting, Richard Skipper has been celebrating the artists you love. Richard Skipper is all about celebrating life, art, and his guest body of work. Please join us while he showcases these diverse and talented individuals. Here's Richard Skipper.
Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. Who or what are you celebrating today? For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. My show is all about celebrating life, celebrating art, celebrating whatever it is we can find to celebrate in this crazy world that we're living in. I'd like to begin by celebrating my dear friend, Celeste Simone, because she brought Brian Seth Hurst to my attention, and here he is. We're going to celebrate him today. Brian, first of all, who or what are you celebrating today?
Well, you know, it's funny that you mentioned celebrate. The opening of the show is the song Celebrate. I want to celebrate. I want to have a celebration. And it is that we rewrote the lyric because I used to be a songwriter to kind of welcome everybody to the show. And the show is actually set up as a celebration, not just me kind of celebrating a return, but, you know, I'm super clear on my purpose in the world, which is, you know, just to connect authentically, engage authentically, and inspire people to discover what they can to be the best that they can be and contribute to the world. And so the whole show is set up as a celebration. So that seems to be kind of serendipitous with your theme. And I'm celebrating the fact that I'm still here. So.
Well, I'm glad that we're on the same wavelength. You know, the other night I was watching Sunset Boulevard, and when they said you're making a comeback, she said, "I hate that word. It's a return." And it's funny that you say that this is a return. I mean, it's been 40 years since you've done this type of a show.
Yeah, I actually stopped singing and performing when I moved to Los Angeles in 1984. And I moved to Los Angeles, ostensibly moved to Los Angeles to write songs and music for film, and worked with some great collaborators, but that never really happened. I got involved in production and in marketing and in the television industry, and sort of just left that behind. As a matter of fact, my partner, Andrew, I used to tell him I used to be a singer. And of course, without a warmed up voice and everything, he never believed me. And so, you know, I'd sing around the house, but it was no great shakes. And I don't think I really ever had anything to make a comeback from, because I left it. I gave it up. I didn't think I had the kind of support, emotional support from my family that I needed. Both my parents were in show business. It was the last thing my father wanted for me. And, you know, came out and moved to LA and just forgot about it. And then, long story short, during the pandemic, I would go for a walk. My musical director, Michael Orland, who had been my musical director 40 years ago, I kept running into him and his dog Jinx walking during the pandemic. And one day I said to him, wouldn't it be a kick in the rubber parts if I went back to singing? And he said, I would love it. So I waited 8 months, and then I called him and I said, look, I'm going to come in. I need you to be completely honest with me. If it is not there, just tell me. We'll call it a day. If it's still there and I can find that guy again, we'll take it from there. And that's, you know, I did a lot of open mics with him to try out material. And I was standing at Oscars one night talking to Luis Camacho, who books the shows. And I said, you know, I'm thinking about doing a show. I haven't done one in 40 years. And he said, I hope you will start here. And that's what happened.
Wow. Well, you know, something you just said that just jumped out at me, rather than finding that guy again, let's find the guy that's you've now become. Because, you know, 40 years, there's a lot of shading. I'm sure even if you were to do some of these songs 40 years ago, your take on those songs are very different. Life experiences, everything begins to take over. I want to go back. Where you said both of your parents are in the business.
Both of my parents are gone. So it's kind of interesting that me returning to singing, there's really no one in my family. My sister has also passed. There's really no one, and a lot of cousins have passed. There's really no one in my family to participate in this return.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up outside of Philadelphia. My father was the #1 radio DJ in Philadelphia. As a matter of fact, he was the first to play Tony Bennett's records. So with Tony Bennett's death, I had people like Tony Bennett and Rosemary Clooney. These people were around in my childhood. I didn't know or care who they were, but they were around. And my mother was Philadelphia's first woman television producer. So I actually grew up, my father's show went out live from Steel Pier in Atlantic City. It was called Summertime on the Pier. And I used to sit in the control room and just watch everything and watch everybody else. And yeah, so that was the background. It was like in the DNA.
Well, when you were growing up, I mean, in this household, were you feeling a pull to go into this business on any level whatsoever?
Yeah.
I asked for a photograph of you at 5 years of age. There's a reason to my badness. I believe the 5-year-old self is the purest self. That's before life begins to tell us who we should be or who we shouldn't be, and peer pressure and all of that begins to happen. But you sent me this photograph, and this is you. 5 years old in this picture?
That's at 3. I really didn't have one.
Okay.
But I also sent you this photograph of me at 2. And that kid is still deep inside of me. He's just that little kid that's always like optimistic and always happy. My father received every Broadway show album as a DJ. And so we had an entire library of Broadway show albums in the house. I would play them and sing along. My mother was actually an Agnes DeMille dancer and appeared in Oklahoma on Broadway.
Wow.
So
wow.
It was in there, and I would just sing along. And I could not think of anything other that I wanted to be in the world than on Broadway. And I never made it to Broadway. I had a couple close calls. But I was in a tour of Fiddler on the Roof. Fiddler on the Roof's like the mafia. Once you're in, you can't get out.
I know.
And Theo Bickel was Tevye. And when I did my first nightclub act I did it at Jan Wallman's in New York.
God. She was a dear friend of mine.
I loved her. She was such a champion. With my collaborator and partner at the time, Allison Franzetti, Allison Brewster, now Allison Brewster Franzetti. Theo came. He came to support me, and that was amazing. And so, yes, but it was, it was really hard because it was all about, at that time, wanting to prove that I could do it, especially if your parents didn't want you to do it. My mother secretly did, but trying to prove that you had what it takes. And you're right. At this time in my life, I don't have anything to prove. So I just get to be there with the audience and have a good time and sing stuff that I believe in. You said something about life changing. I sing No Time at All. I've changed the lyrics to make for Stephen Schwartz's No Time at All. And the character says, now I've known my fears for 66 years. I've had troubles and tears by the score. But the only thing I trade them for is 67 more. I am 67. Oh, I have never sung a lyric more true to myself in my life.
It's interesting. Certain things are jumping out at me. When you mentioned that you were doing this 40 years ago, it was a nightclub instead of cabaret. That's changed a little bit as well. What is your recollection of that first night that you walked on stage? It's one thing if you're in a play like Fiddler on the Roof, where you are hiding behind a certain facade. That facade disappears when you're doing a solo show. What was that experience like for you the first time that you stepped on stage in front of an audience?
So that was
as yourself.
That was at Silver Lining on Restaurant Row in New York. Michael was I'm sorry, what?
I played it too. We may have been crossing at the same time.
We may have.
Yes.
I had a different guest from Nine, the musical, every night, and James, now Celeste Lacine. And so I was there as a songwriter. I was doing singer-songwriter. I was doing my own material. I stepped on stage. I was nervous because I didn't know if people would come. I'd never done it before. There was an improv section in the show where Michael and I made up songs. I didn't know if that would work. Once I got into it, I enjoyed myself. I could sing, but I never considered myself to be like a singer. And now I realize that I am a singer, but I'm a storyteller who sings. And yeah, so having that experience, I think I was so nervous, to be honest, Richard, about getting people's approval and being funny and personable. When I listen to the tapes, because they're all recorded, I can hear how I relaxed. Like a week on, I was in much better shape. But I can hear myself trying really hard. And it's painful to listen to, because that 26-year-old so wanted to be loved.
Well, we are our worst critics. And going back and listening to this, do you feel that other people that would listen to the same tapes would have the same experience that you feel that you're having? Or are they just going to enjoy the journey that you're on?
Probably not. I think the audience really did enjoy it. But I do remember, I don't know if you remember Kurt Davis, who wrote for the New York Post. So Kurt wrote this in a review, and you never remember the good reviews. He slathered sentiment about the stage like shaving cream. And I never forgot it. And it was very helpful, because I think that was looking at it and saying, yeah, it was kind of schmaltzy. I was trying to please the audience, but the other thing it taught me to do was not read reviews.
Well, I want to go back to your parents for just a moment. You said that your parents did not want you to go into this profession. Was this something that they actually verbalized? And if so, where did they see you going?
Okay, so I come from a family of Ukrainian Jewish immigrants and German Jewish immigrants. My father never had a college education. He ended up in broadcasting at 16. He went to an audition with a friend, and he got the broadcaster's part. So he never went to college. It was something, I think, that bothered him. He used to read the encyclopedia. He felt the business was filled with a lot of heartache and a lot of judgment, a lot of criticism. I now understand all this, Richard, that it was only because he cared about me, but and loved me. But all I could see was that he was not supporting me. He had me go to lunch with Shelley Gross, who was producing The King and I on Broadway and Fiddler at the time. And Shelley's job was to talk me out of show business. Instead, I talked him into giving me an audition for Fiddler on the Roof.
Absolutely. That's great.
But when I showed up at early in the morning, and I was not equity, I was not in the union. By the way, I have been reinstated into equity. So that's like, wow, I think they just wanted my money. But now if someone calls me for Broadway, I'm ready.
You're ready. Yes, good.
But he had forgotten to tell them. And so I hung around all day. Nobody called him. It was just, I don't know if they didn't take me seriously. Anyway, the stage manager took pity on me, and I was the last person heard after all the equity people went. And I sang, "And now across the green aisle." And I held the note until everybody looked up, finished the note, and I got in the chorus, got my equity card. And I was off and running. My mother came to the show. She thought I was general understudy, so I went on for different people. My mother came to the show. She was kvelling. She bought out a whole section of the front 2 rows. My father never said a thing. When he was 80-something years old, I was singing around the house as I was visiting him. And he said to me, "Boy, you have such a great voice." And I said, "You couldn't have told me this 50 years ago." And he said, "Well, I'm sorry. I should have supported you." And I said, "You know, Dad, it's water under the bridge, but I appreciate the apology." But coming back now, you know, my father had a ring, and I just put it on. My father passed away in 2020. I just put it on. It was my grandfather's ring, and it was my father's ring. And I just put it on for the first time last night. And I thought, I'm going to have him with me on that stage. I'm going to wear this ring, because I know that he would be proud of what I'm doing, even if he couldn't say he was.
Wow, that's beautiful. What a great story. What did being on the road with Fiddler, how did that shape the beginnings of your life in this business? And did it make you want more of it? I interviewed Carol Lawrence, and she said being in this business is the greatest elixir in the world. The more we get, the more we want. The rub, however, is whether or not the public wants it. And that's a very interesting thing to hear, and even to verbalize those words. How did that period in your life shape you in terms of the trajectory of the life that you created for yourself?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I love the camaraderie of the cast. The funny thing was we were out on the road for like 2 weeks, and then we came in for a week, and I got to be on the $20,000 pyramid, and I won $10,000.
I have to ask you, who were you opposite? What star got you the money?
Lori Walters from 8 is Enough.
Okay.
And I won the first time. My mother, in typical Jewish mother, I called her. I said, "Mom, I won $10,000. She said, "Isn't it called the $20,000 pyramid?" I had to explain that if you won, you didn't, the first time up. And went back out on the road. So I didn't really have to worry about money at that time. But I think I felt, even with all the camaraderie, that I wasn't good enough. Because all the people in the cast, I was brand new. All the people in the cast were real experienced. It was the Fiddler family. The one person that kind of embraced me was Marilyn Coopy. And Theo. Now, like, a very interesting Theo story. So when I came back to the cast after being away, they had another tour, came back, and Theo gave me a note. And I said, and I had been studying acting with Michael Howard, and I said, "Mr. Mikkel, if you have a problem with my performance, please tell the director. I'm 23 years old, right?" For the next couple of weeks in L'Chaim, he would come up to shake my hand and then just go right by me. He would do that trick handshake thing. Then one night he grabbed my hand and he pulled me towards, and he whispered in my ear and he said, "I don't like what you did, but I have to admire you for doing it." And we were friends after that.
Wow.
So much so that when I was vice chair of the Emmy Awards years later, writer Lynn Roth was good friends with Theo. She brought Theo to the governor's ball. Richard, I saw him, I hugged him, and I cried like a baby. Because that man, he was a professional. He was also president of Actors Equity at the time.
Yes.
And it just, so there were influences. And oddly enough, Arne Gunderson, I just saw on a cruise after all those years. I hadn't seen him since I was 23. After all those years, he was on this cruise that I was on. And we just told so many great stories. But, I didn't really want to work my way up from chorus boy. I have to be honest, Richard, I was lazy. I just thought I can sing. Even though I studied acting, with one of the best teachers in the world, I was just lazy. And I had a casting director from Joy Todd, a woman named Venetia Rickerby, take me to lunch. And she said, "I'm going to be honest with you. You could be a good actor, but you will never be great because you don't want it enough and you're not committed enough and you're lazy. So you should consider getting out of the business." And I took her advice because she was right.
Now, where in the scheme of things did your club act happen? Was that around the same time, sooner, later? When did it happen?
The club act was in 1983. Fiddler was in 79. And the club act was more, I had discovered songwriting. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, Richard, ego aside, I was a great songwriter. I wrote with Michael Orland. I wrote with John Boswell. I wrote with Marshall Malamed. I wrote with a lot of people. A lot of my songs were sung in cabaret. Some were recorded. Lord knows where they are now. I was director of artist and media relations for Heartstrings, which was a musical that toured the country raising money for people living with AIDS.
Yes.
And there was a hole in the show. And I wrote this lyric. It was a quintet, 5 people losing the one person they loved to AIDS. And Stephen Schwartz wrote the music for that. So I got to write with Stephen. And although that song did not go into the show, it's an amazing song. I was just thinking about it yesterday. There's no way I could sing it because I'd have to get 4 other people on stage. But the nightclub act was a chance to showcase the songs that I'd written as the songwriter. So it really didn't matter because a lot of songwriters couldn't sing, you know, that like a nice voice, great songwriter, but really couldn't sing. So I figured if I couldn't sing it, I really wouldn't bother me. But the really great songs, I had the guest stars sing.
But was
Holly Nash, Julie Shepard, Louise Ettikin, James Lacine, Celeste. Yeah.
Celeste. Wow. And as you started doing the songwriting, was that where your heart was leaning towards? I mean, you said that you were lazy, but did the same laziness apply itself to your songwriting?
No. I mean, I would write with, oh my gosh, I don't know if you ever met Jeffrey Roy, but I would sit down at the piano with Jeffrey Roy and never not have a song. I would sit down at the piano with Alison Brewster and never not have a song. I was a member of the Songwriters Roundtable at the Actors Institute, where you would bring your music to play. Mm-hmm. I loved it. Where I fell down was in the marketing of it, was in the selling of the songs. I just couldn't, for whatever reason. I ironically went into marketing later. It was easy to market other people's stuff. But I enjoyed songwriting immensely. And actually when Michael, So Cool Yule, which was sung by Bette Midler, amongst others, and Louis Armstrong, they never had a second verse. And I was singing Cool Yule at Michael's open mic. And so I said, I'm going to write a second verse. And I'm going to make it, in the 50s time. And I handed it to Michael and I said, I'm shocked. I still have it. And so that's why I rewrote the opening of Celebration to be more appropriate to celebrate why we were all here. So I love songwriting. I love the chance to express myself. And also, oddly enough, Richard, I think I went through a horrible, horrible breakup in 2012 after 20 years. And so many of those songs that I had written were comforting. And it was almost like my younger self said, this is probably going to happen to this guy in the future. So let's write him some songs for the future.
Do you feel that the direction that your career and everything took would have been different if your parents had been supportive and encouraged you to go into this business?
Richard, I used to think about that, and it was an exercise in futility. Because I have had an amazing life, I've gotten to travel the world on other people's money. I've worked in Shanghai, in Norway, I've worked with broadcasters all over the world. I got to work on TiVo as part of the original development team. And I think, I'm very faithful. I wouldn't say I'm religious, but I'm spiritual. And, I don't know what God's plan was. But years ago, my ex said to me, sometimes it's not what you do in the world, it's how you do it.
That's right.
And that line made such an impression on me. And my mother's philosophy was, if you go to someone's house, clean up after yourself and leave it better than you found it. And she felt the same way about the world. And when she was dying, she said to me, use your talents that you have to make a difference. I mean, she used to take us, she was the chairman of Easter Seals in Philadelphia. And every Saturday we volunteered as kids. So all of that was instilled. So it may have been different, but I think it would have been totally ego driven. There is a verse in the Tao Te Ching, the 13th verse, which I paraphrase all the time, which is seeking favor brings disaster.
Yes.
If you go for fame and fortune, your life's going to be about fame and fortune. And once you get it, your life's going to be about keeping it. And once you lose it, your life's going to be about getting it back. And in all of that, you may not have a life. And
yesterday I had Alan Shane on the show, and he's written a book called The Star Dressing Room. And he was working in David Merrick's office. He wanted desperately to be the standby for Ricardo Montalban in Jamaica with Lena Horne. And everybody kept saying, no, you're not right. And finally, he got the opportunity, and he went in and they said, okay, because they never thought that Ricardo Montalban was ever going to miss the show. And then one Wednesday afternoon, he gets a call, you're going on this afternoon. And of course, everything stopped for him. And his therapist at the time said, this is everything you've been working for. You need to go out there and own it. And he had to convince himself mentally that he was a star before walking out on the stage, because he says if he didn't have that mindset, he knew that the audience would never buy him in this role. And of course, the audience was there to see Ricardo Montalban. So we all have these
double
moments.
the pressure.
Yes. So we all have these moments in our life where, you know, on a dime, anything can happen. And if it's something, you know, Carol Channing used to say, be careful what you wish for because you'll get it. When you want something bad enough and then the opportunities start coming, I'm curious to know with yourself, what was the real turning point? It's one thing that you are pursuing a career in this business. We already know that your parents were not gung-ho about you being in the business, but you mentioned earlier that your modus operandi at that time was seeking approval from your audience, from your parents, from everyone else. What was the moment where you said, I'm letting go of that and I'm moving on and I don't need to be in this business on that level anymore?
I don't know that there ever was that moment. It was maybe more about a life moment. I've been an intuitive for many, many years. And I actually have a book out called Whole, which is a spiritual book. And that book has been re-released, but it came out right at my breakup, like it was written before the breakup. Oh, look at you. How about that? It was written before the breakup. And in the breakup, those 3 years of getting myself back afterwards and starting to question, what was my purpose in life? What was the meaning of life? What did I learn from 20 years in that relationship? What did I learn from my parents? I just started questioning everything. If you want to know the moment that I knew I could, and I don't necessarily, honestly, Richard, I don't know. Whatever God throws my way, we'll see. But right now, I don't think I'm actively pursuing a performing career past this show. Like, that's my attention right now. We're going to film it in 2 cameras or 3 cameras. But there was a moment where Michael called me on stage to do a second song. And I sang Never Never Land, a song that I have always loved. And I watched the playback and I went, I'm present. That's all I need to be, is present. I don't have to entertain. I just have to be who I am and share who I am with the audience.
But isn't there people who, that's why people come to see you. They want to see you.
I hope so.
Well, I know so. And, you know, and Michael, let's face it, truly one of the best in the business.
There were only 2 people like Michael. There was a date conflict, and Michael said, I'd hate to subcontract this out. And I said, no, Michael, you're part of the show. Even our banter is part of the show. There are only 2 people I would let play for me right now. Might may change in the future. And that would be Michael Orland and Allison Brewster Franzetti. Michael, he has something intuitive about him that actually knows the person he's playing for, even if they're a complete stranger. It's like he tunes in at an open mic and becomes this backbone. It's like, you know, that trust exercise you do when you're little, they say fall backwards and someone will catch you. You know, he will be there to catch you. And that is remarkable. And I treasure my 40 plus years of friendship with Michael. And the emotional, the fact that he will be at the Keys 40 years later, like he was that first night, blows my mind.
I wish I could be there. Trust me, I wish I could be there. When you started moving in other directions, because you've worn so many hats, out of all the hats that you've worn, which one fit you the most comfortably outside of what you thought your purpose was going to be?
Well, other than the intuitive coaching that I do, where I really feel like I'm vibing and helping make a difference, I have to say producing, because my mother was a producer and I must have been absorbing stuff. And I have that mindset. And A good producer is smart enough to know what they don't know. And the job of a producer is to assemble, in my mind, is to assemble a great team and get out of their way. And I'll tell you something. One of the best mentors I had in my life was Anne Sweeney. I had been on air for FX. I did Breakfast Time. And Anne Sweeney was an amazing mentor. She went on to be president of ABC Disney. And her policy was to hire the best people and get out of their way and let them do their jobs and let them solve their own problems unless they had a problem they couldn't solve, and then she would step in. And so that was my mindset. What I learned from my mother, what I learned from my mentors, I had all women mentors. Betty Cohen, who was president of the Cartoon Network, to a lesser extent, Jerry Laybourne. I had all women mentors, which was amazing. And then to approach life with that producer mindset, that's why I knew I needed a director for the show as the producer of my own show. I knew I needed a director. I knew I needed an associate producer. For the last piece I did in virtual reality, a piece called My Brother's Keeper, I knew those boys, Connor Hare and Alex Meter, were aces in terms of director. So my job was to give them everything they needed to do a good job, to pull from my network. So that is the most enjoyable thing to me, to be at a project at its inception and work to give people what they need, to put it together, to be able to express themselves to the best possible degree that they can. So yeah, I think you could tell because I'm super passionate about producing.
No, I love and for me, it's all about the collaborative process. And I love what you just said, because it's surrounding yourself with the right people for this project. Once you and Michael agreed that you were going to do this, how did you settle on your director?
I have taken Michael's guidance at every point because I trust him. I felt I was having vocal problems, and Michael said, well, I'm sending you to Dr. Barbu. She's the best ENT. And it turns out I had acid reflux, not vocal problems. Then Michael said, I've got a director for you, Lee Martino. And I just took his word for it. I was like, okay, great. Because his level of experience and his knowledge of me, I knew he would make the right match. So I wasn't worried. There were some funny moments, like I would say, and I'm thinking about doing this song, and I would sing the song, and Lee would go, he wouldn't say anything, and I would go, okay, I get that. So I guess we're not doing that song.
It's all there, he knows. So how did you? Once you knew, or did you always know what your opening number was going to be? And as you start creating the arc of the evening, how does it start unfolding? My guess, having worked with Michael years ago, is that it's very much a collaborative process with the ideas bouncing back and forth like a great tennis match.
So the arrangements are, here's what happened. So the opening number was originally going to be On a Wonderful Day Like Today, I Defy Any Cloud. And I tried it out and I didn't like it and it didn't fit well. And Michael liked it. And he said, no, you're doing, I said, it just doesn't feel right. Allison Brewster and I opened our act with Celebrate. And I heard it on the tape. And I said, I think I'd rather open with that. I love the song. I love what it says. Then I said to Michael and Lee, I'm going to rewrite the lyric. And I'm going to talk, Michael, so could you play down underneath this? So I'll try a song with Michael. And, there are songs now. I'm doing 5 original songs as part of this that I wrote with Michael or wrote with other people. I'm doing a song that Celeste used to end her act with, called Larger Than Life, which I never forgot. Oddly enough, Celeste forgot it, and Ira Antelis, the man who wrote the song, forgot it. So I sang it into my phone, recorded it, and sent it to Ira. It jogged his memory, and he did a lead sheet for me. So there are things I've been waiting years to sing. And then with Lee and Michael, we worked on the order. And then here's something super, super cool, I think. We'll see if it works. So I wrote a best-selling kids book called A Pigtail with Olivia Newton-John, and we were good friends. And when Olivia came back in 1999, it was going to be no thanks. It was going to be New Year's Eve of 1999. She asked me to write her show with her. And so I, like any good writer at the time, and I consider myself to be a writer foremost of everything. And so you could tell me there are a million things in the world I couldn't do, but no one can tell me I can't write, including Chat GPT. Anyway, so we recorded 2 hours of work tapes. And I found them in the garage because Andrew, my partner, was after me to clean out the garage. And I found them in the garage and I put them on, and I felt like I spent the afternoon again with her.
Mm.
And I said, you know, there's this section of the tape where I ask her what she wants to open with, and she starts singing Magic, and we discuss why. And then I ask her what the second verse is, and she sings the second verse. And Michael, what I want to do is start out with mellow, just the first 2 verses. And then I would like you to play underneath while we hear this tape. And then I would like to pick up Magic from where she's singing it. And Michael is able to, like, so fast to figure out the arrangement. And we're, you know, solidifying it now. But I think it will be one of those, like, not, hey, look at me, I was friends with Olivia Newton-John, not one of those moments, but hopefully to give you insight into this woman. And you know, and I have some great stories I'm going to tell about her. Well, one I'll tell now. So I used to say, we were out touring for the book, and all these people, she used to buy all these people different things, I guess because they asked her if she could. And I said, you know what, Olivia, I don't understand why you buy all these people things. I don't think you need to do that. Then we're in Barney's. And she says, here, try on this beautiful cashmere coat. So I try it on, and she goes, boy, you look great in that. It's too bad I'm not buying things for people anymore. And I said to her, I can assure you, Olivia, I don't want anything from you, you know? And it was just, you know, and I was so honored. She thanked me in her biography, in the same paragraph that she thanked Cliff Richard. And I have to say, you know how you kind of take a friendship for granted? And I mean, I treasured our texts and all that stuff, and our back and forth, but it left a void. And when I started to sing again, I had sent her the recordings that we made of the open mic. And she said, you've got it. She said, keep going, keep going. So she was supporting me. And then she offered Steve Real. She said, I have a great coach for you, Steve Real. And I said, I love Steve because he's been with her from the beginning. I said, I love Steve, but I've got my Orly. And so I'm doing okay. But yeah, it'll almost be a year. It's August 8th. I don't remember the death of many people, but that I remember.
I know. So
there are these moments, and we've decided on the order. And Michael said, you can't keep changing things. You can't keep changing things. And so finally we nailed it. And then I said to him, you know, Michael, before the end of the show, there's something from Little Me, and I want to add it in. And it's, here's to us, my darlings, my dear. Here's to us tonight. Not for what? And I said, I just want to do that as a toast before going into the final number. And he looked at me and he said, I think that's great. So now it's nailed. And now I have vocal stuff to do with Celeste. There are certain songs, you know how it is. You go through and you go, boy, I need vocal work on that. That's Celeste. Boy, I need coaching work on that. That's Michael. Boy, I need directing work on that. That's Lee. And to a certain extent, I have that objectivity with myself. You know, mostly Lee tells me to stand still, but there are other things that she wants me to do. So yeah, it just kind of gelled and put itself together. And there are other songs I would like to sing, but not yet. So,
well, speaking of Celeste Simone, everyone, she's intuitive as well, and she has a real knack just talking to someone without even hearing you sing, of knowing where you need to go. And she's just brilliant that way. How did you and Celeste meet?
Well, you know, Celeste came and she sang the song that I wrote, Stranger in My Bed, with Jeffrey Roy. She sang in my nightclub act. And I had stayed in touch with her over the years, but we didn't have a lot of communication. And one day Michael said, I think you need to study with Celeste. And we got back in touch, and it was like no time had passed. She did say to me, you are the student here. You are not the CEO. You are not in charge. You need to listen to me and not argue with me. And when she said that, I got it. And the thing about Celeste is she puts all her attention on the well-being of her student.
Mm-hmm.
It's never about her. It's always about the student. Plus, she has an amazing sense of humor. So voice work with Celeste is actually fun. And I called her one day and I said, I have completely forgotten how to sing. I don't even know where to start. I don't know what's happening. Blah, 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 blah. I said, does this happen to anyone else? And she goes, everybody. And I was like, okay, good. What do I do? So,
and she's worked with everybody, and and I've heard her say that before. I mean, everybody, I think that we're all cut from the same cloth on many different levels, and we all have the same desires. Sometimes our needs are stronger in some areas than they are in others, but there are things that, look for the common threads that are there. You mentioned something earlier, and it triggered something for me. You mentioned, and forgive me if I paraphrase what you said, but you made a comment about taking your friendship with Olivia Newton-John, for example, for granted. Are there other areas of your life that you've taken for granted?
When I think about it, I don't think so. Because, I work very diligently to be mindful and to be present. And I always was present as a little kid. I think I may have taken my feelings for granted. I think I may have not given them enough reverence or compassion. So I may have just like, oh, you're sad. You'll get over it. That kind of stuff. But I don't do that anymore. I stop and I ask myself, how am I feeling about this? And Richard, you talked about life's experiences and the shadings and things. One thing I noticed about Olivia is that the songs changed. Like I would see everything. Her life's experience was brought to I Honestly Love You. And there was a richness and tone, even though she could always hit those high notes. There was just a depth. And I look at the depth of experience in my life, and I am so grateful, because I figure on some level, if I can connect with my feelings, not just in everyday life, but in a song, that maybe I'm giving other people permission to connect with their feelings as well. When I did my Brother's Keeper, which was the VR film that I did for PBS as the producer and creating the story with the directors, we premiered at Sundance at a thing called VR on the Mountain. And I stood off to the side, and the story was about two brothers who ended up fighting on opposite sides of the Civil War and meet one last time at the battlefield in Antietam. And people came out of that headset in tears. And I think all you ever want to do, well, you want to know that you matter from an ego point of view, but I think our hearts want to be recognized. I think we want to move people. And so when people are moved by something we've done or something we've said, it's kind of an acknowledgement of something real, of the truth, of a true connection. So when people came out of the VR headset and they were in tears, I was like, well, this is what success feels like. And I was really pissed later when we didn't get an Emmy nomination. And a very good friend of mine said, oh, I'm sure you made this movie for an Emmy nomination, didn't you? And the truth was, no, I did not. And so I've learned a lot about ego and not maybe keeping that in check as much as recognizing when it's at play and maybe making another choice. But the idea that you can use music and words to make a difference, that's huge.
I think it was Celeste who said to me that the definition of ego was edging God out.
Yes, I've read that many times. Yes.
And, from Celeste, but I think it was Wayne Dwyer who originally, I could be wrong, who...
Yes, in I could probably tell you it was in Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. I believe it was in that book, yes.
As you are looking back at everything that's leading you to this moment right now, you had mentioned, at Oscars, them giving you the platform and the opportunity to perform there. Did you pick the date and then work to get the show created, or
No.
Okay.
No, we thought it was really interesting. First of all, Louis Camacho and Dan Gore and David, they have really done their best, and they treat performers with respect, which is lovely. And as I say to Michael, I never want to give anybody a hard time. I was a talent executive, for God's sakes. I know what it is to be a temperamental artist, and I don't want to treat people that way. So I try to make it as easy as possible. We had selected the date, which was September 29th. And Michael had always warned me from the beginning that he might get, he didn't say a more important booking, but he might get a booking that he might have to take. And that happened. And it just happened like 2 weeks ago. And I really trust divine timing. So I wasn't upset at all. I said to Michael, I completely understand. And there was only one day that we could all, the director, Michael, that really kind of would work. And it was going to be October 20th. And I thought, well, this is great because people won't be roasting their off, because it was going to be September 29th, still pretty hot in Palm Springs. And something just felt right about the new date. I was kind of relieved. We already had everything in place. Michael was about to hire the musicians. There's one musician that I had met, Jeff Piffer, who's an amazing saxophonist, jazz saxophonist. And I had met him because he found me on LinkedIn and asked me my opinion on a documentary that he had made. And it was a brilliant documentary. And I said, I'll give you my opinion. I'll work with you, but I need you to play for me if I ever do a show. So he's going to be there. Michael's going to hire the other musicians. It just worked out that date is set. Now, for me, this is about getting in physical shape as far as stamina goes, being able to deepen my breath capacity. I'm all right now, but I want to be able to have the confidence that I'm not going to run out of breath, that, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And then the fine tuning, and that will all happen. I really trust the timing of it. Confession here. So when Louis suggested the pricing for the event, the part of me that still didn't feel worth it or valuable or whatever you want to call it said, oh my God, who is going to pay that? And then I thought, well, I'm not going to respond. I'm just going to give it a day. And I was at the gym and I thought, you know what? The people that come to this show are going to have a great show, and I am going to see to that. And not only will it be worth what they pay, it will be worth their time. So I'm okay with that price. But it took me a minute to get there.
And it ain't cheap to do these shows, folks.
No, it is not. And you know what? I mean, at this stage in my life, I'd like to think I'm largely transparent about process because I want other people to know it, this is the story. This is what you get, so sharing that, this is like, well, wait a minute. Whoa. And then Michael actually saying to me, well, if you think your people, which was funny, your people will pay that. And I was like, well, I would hope that more than my people would come to this show. And tickets are going very well. I mean, I've had people tell me that they're coming from England and that they're coming from Florida and they're coming from Maryland. And it was like, wait, all these people waited for me to return.
Of course.
I was like, wow. And so Michael said, this is not going to be the only time you'll do this show. He said this last week. And I said, well, we'll talk about that after. But I know he wants me to do it in Los Angeles. And frankly, I would like to return to New York as a performer. So I don't know what that will be. One of the reasons we are filming everything is so that at least I have a calling card. And I'm going to tell the audience, last night we went to see the Skivvies Rocky Horror Show with Lauren Molina and Nick Surley and a host of others. And at the beginning, they said, the use of cell phones is wholly encouraged,
I do the same thing.
I want people to film everything they want to film. I had a YouTube cooking show. I used to make so many mistakes during the pandemic. And I was like to Andrew, well, we should probably leave the mistakes in, because you're human.
It's funny. I mean, these being in the moment as an artist, and I'm thinking, if you're thinking, how am I sounding? How are they responding to what I'm doing? Then you're not in the moment. You were completely taken out. I mean, it was in the news this week. I can't remember the singer's name, but a singer that was on stage singled out two people in the front who happened to be filming her. Did you hear about this?
No,
And
but it does remind me of the Patty Lupone story.
well, we all know that, but she, chastised them. I mean, the thing is that, when I understand this, I want my audience to be very much in the moment of being there as well. But we live in a crazy world right now where people can film something and then take something you say out of context and put it in a whole different. Whoopi Goldberg said that's why she doesn't do as many comedy outings as she used to, because you never know where it's going to end up and what's going to happen. But if you're using it for the betterment of you or the audience or getting the word out, I say I'm all for it. I want to show a few pictures. We've got a few minutes left. And I want you to say the first thing that pops into your head. And I pulled just a few things just for the fun of it. Here we are.
Oh, my God. That's Michael Manzuri. So I was anchor of NABShow Live for, I think, 5 years. I had a blast. It was all about technology. I was their immersive specialist. Michael is a very good friend. I absolutely adore him. He actually has invented cameras for purposes that we needed him to invent cameras for. He's one of my favorite people, and he runs Radiant Images. So, yeah, and that was a blast. Ryan Salazar asked me to be host, and we've been great friends ever since. So, yes, I love NABShow Live. We didn't do it this year. We haven't done it since the pandemic, but I think it's coming back next year.
Oh, but you did this for about 5 years, am I right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. I have my father's on-air interview capabilities.
Oh, that's great. How this book came about, and I can't wait to get my own copy of it.
Well, thank you. So I had a show with Buena Murray called Determination. The idea behind the show was that I had gone to political rallies in Iowa because I was living in Illinois, across the border, and the things that we heard at the rallies I never heard in the news. And so the idea was that students and millennials at the time could be the journalists and tell the honest truth of what they saw. The show crashed and burned the first election cycle, then it crashed and burned the second, and I'd given everything to this. I was sitting in the Moline airport, wondering, coming back to LA, wondering now what, and I heard, give us 30 days, and at the end of 30 days, you will have a book, and the book will be named whole. So each day, I wrote a chapter. Turns out there were 40 chapters, and each night I sent them to a very good friend of mine, Terry Bergman, because I had to be held accountable. Sometimes I got it into 11:59, but I got it in, and that's how the book came about, a chapter a day. And now I'm actually working on a workbook. The audio book is done, and hopefully the audio book will be released by the holidays along with the workbook.
Will you reach out to me when it's ready, and then come back and we'll talk about this?
Oh, absolutely. There's a long story behind why I didn't go with a regular publisher. But now, after going back and doing the audiobook and reading it after 12 years, it's like, oh my God, this information is still really relevant. So more people have to benefit from it. So we're going to try and get wider distribution this time.
Absolutely. I'd love to go deeper about this. And of course, we've already talked about this, but how this came about.
So I was at Olivia's house, and she said, let me tell you a couple of pig jokes. And the first one was, two pigs are walking past a toxic dump, and there are two guys in hazmat suits. One pig turns to the other and says, they're such human beings. And the second joke was, two pigs are in a trophy room, and there's a human head on the trophy wall. And one pig says to the other, don't you think we should stop this senseless slaughter? And the other one says, why bother? There are 4.5 billion of them. And I said to her, look, why don't we just do a joke book of pig jokes? And so we didn't do that, but we did a narrative. And we ended up at the DIFA, because I was working for DIFA as Director of Artists and Media Relations. We ended up at DIFA Benefit in New York, which Olivia was kind enough to go to, sat next to the publisher, the president, Dick Snyder of Simon & Schuster, who said, when are you going to write this? When are you going to write a book for me, to Olivia? And she said, come with me to the ladies' room. And she had his card. Very long story short, we sent the draft to a guy named John Sargent, who was the editor of Children's Divisions. He said, we don't do books like this. I said, okay, well, I'm going to be in New York, and I picked a Friday on that day, and I'll come see you if that's all right with you. And I went to New York, went to Barnes & Noble Sale Annex, looked at every single children's book they had a meeting with him, went to the airport, called Olivia, said, I'm rewriting this book in rhyme as fast as I can, faxed it to him, and he said, we'll buy the book. And then, of course, we got an editor and everything else. It was the first children's picture book printed on recycled paper.
Wow. Well, good for you.
He insisted on that.
So we saw this picture before. What you would say to this kid now looking back on 67 years?
You're adorable. You are sweet. You have a great heart. Don't ever let anybody take that away from you. Don't be afraid to follow your own path.
Perfect.
God, I was sexy.
You still are. So
I didn't know this at the time because I hung out with so many people that were better looking. So Martha Swope's company took these photos. Martha Swope was the Broadway.
Was the theater photographer, everyone.
And Judy Jacksina of Jacksina Friedman did the PR. So I had a great team behind me. And the photographer said, what if you just lay on the piano in your socks and pose like this? But I didn't think I was that hot. When I found this picture later, I said to Allison Brewster, I said, oh my God, I was so hot. If only I had known it at the time. And we just had a good laugh over that. So yeah, that's what I looked like 40 years ago.
And Judy Jacksina, I loved her so much. And
they were crazy,
yes.
But they did a great job.
And I loved her.
That's a result of Judy Jacksina. She got me in the Daily News to publicize the show with Silver Lining.
Oh, that was great. I wish that I could be in Palm Springs, one of my favorite places.
I wish you could too. It's lovely to meet you.
You too, and I want you here in New York so that Celeste and I can get a whole group and go and celebrate you.
Oh, that would be amazing. I've already talked to Susie Mosher about doing the lineup. If I ever show up at the same time Michael does, I can do the lineup, but
you should
we'll
definitely
have to take that one step further.
Just 2 weeks ago, I have a friend, Robert Bannon, and he did a 2-part show, and Susie Mosher was the first part, and I was the second part. I love her, and Brian, I'm a huge fan of yours now already.
Oh,
I know I am, and I'm going to say my closing remarks. And then I'm going to leave the screen and I'm going to let you have the final word. It could be about anything that we spoke about today that you want to build upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any final message that you want to leave everyone with today. Don't worry about how to end the show. As soon as you say goodbye, the credits will roll. I want to thank Celeste again. And for everyone who's watching, I know that I can speak for Brian when I say this. We don't take it lightly when you show up, whether it's to see us live or whether it's to see us virtually. And the fact that all of you said, we're going to spend an hour with these two guys today means the world to me. This show will be available on demand after this. Please go to my YouTube channel, leave a comment about today's show, because that helps to raise the elevation in terms of the ranking of the video. Tell your friends about this. Tell all your friends about Oscars and Brian, in October 20th. And make sure that you are all there. If you can go to see the show, by all means, because it's one thing for us to sing in our living rooms. It's another thing to be out there on stage with the collective audience, this collective mindset coming together, and there's nothing like it. And even if you see the show 5 times, no two shows are the same, because it's the energy of that room at that moment. I end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Pick up the phone and call someone that you have not spoken to in a long time and let them know how they've made a difference in your life. And trust me, if you do so, you will make a difference in their life. And I don't mean to do this with an email message or a text message or a private inbox message, but a phone call. Let them know now before it's too late. I see this outpouring of love every time we lose. And as we get older, I'm sure it's happening with you, Brian. It's happening with me. As we get older, it's like every other day, something pops up in our feed and we go, oh my God, I can't believe it. I haven't spoken to that person in a while. And I'm thinking of lost time. You talk about things that we take for granted sometimes. Reach out to these people. I have a dear friend, and he says, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different size boats. And I always say, I don't care what size boat you're on, as long as you have a skipper by your side. And with that, I'm going to leave it that screen. And Brian, it's all yours. And I want you to come back when your book goes to the next level with Whole. Thank you so much,
Richard, and thank you for having me today. I had a blast. Boy, if there's one thought I have, it's kind of that it's the people behind you that kind of really matter. If you have a dream and you are able to assemble the right team that you can completely trust, I don't care what it is you want to do, because when you have a vision, you have to trust people with it. And I'm so grateful for the people that are in my life in every aspect. And that's all I have to say. Goodbye.